So this section is the Emerging Voices plenary talks, which is an idea that I think was started last year. And the idea is to highlight new perspectives, fresh voices from the not necessarily younger, but more new members of our community. So we have two speakers with 15 minutes each. The first is Anna Cavalcante, who is a senior data engineer at University College London Hospital. And her work is focused on standardizing healthcare data and liaising quite a lot with the medical side, because do clinicians ever understand software? So if you'd like to come forward and just check that you've got everything you need. Yeah. Anna is going to talk about the challenges of translating clinical data for research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather, for the kind introduction, and thank you for the organizers for creating this this space that allows us to. This is my first RSCCon, and I feel very honored to be part of it. 1 month into my new role as a data engineer at UCLH, I received the news that my mom had been diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. She is doing okay, by the way. I flew to Brazil to be with her at that time, and as you can imagine, it was really, really difficult. One day at one of her appointments, someone handed us her entire medical records, which it's definitely worth to see here. It's a pile of paper, and I felt helpless because there's nothing I could do for her. And I felt angry because I really thought hospitals would be digitized by now. What I come to realize with more experience into this role is the fact that even when hospitals are digitized, it doesn't mean that the data is being used or being seen. So getting data, in fact, from the clinical side to the research side is a lot more complicated than most people think. And I say that as someone who used to work at CERN, high energy physics. I'm pretty sure there are other physicists here. And there, everything is designed around data. So experiments, detectors, planned years in advance, and the codes, they use like simulated data, then test stuff, it's all there. Hospitals, completely different, and you can definitely tell by the paper that I showed you. And you see this like everywhere, missing rows, missing data, clinical notes, which is just like free text, legacy data from previous systems that don't really match the new system. And sometimes like even dates that make you wonder if like time travel is part of the treatment plan, because it's just like crazy dates that you see there. So when researchers try to use that data, they don't start with like curated, clean data sets. They start with like really messy data that really makes the analysis really, really difficult. So what are the challenges when translating data, the clinical data, to research? I think the first thing that I need to mention is that hospitals are designed to deliver care. And for a long time, they haven't had the infrastructure, like proper infrastructure to support research workflows. So at UCLH, for example, UCLH is beautiful hospital, amazing. But we have 16 Linux applications servers. They're just like servers, not clusters. I was so used to work with cursors, just like, why do you have all these servers? But they are basically there to run some internal applications. Like recently, I just trying to make a copy, like a zip compressed copy of a data extract. There's no storage in there for me to do it. It's like, however, things are improving. We do have a trusted research environment at UCL and also at UCLH, which offers much more like secure, robust, has more powers, like more resources, structured space for research. it is a big step to the future. But adoption is still limited. It's not yet the default, and as you may expect, it's also expensive. And the next challenge that I'm going to talk about is the research question. So in theory, a researcher comes to us with a clear, defined question. There's some approvals involved to it, and then we go extract the data, we talk to them, like discuss which variables they want, extract the data, deliver to them, then it's done, right? But that's not what happens in practice. They come with like very broad questions. They may change the questions and then in the middle of the way. And then this really makes our life difficult. They want everything. They come literally like, I want all the variables, all the data from the hospital. And every change that they decide in the middle of the way might require new approval from ethics, and they might need to change the protocol, you know, and this lead to delays of weeks and even months. Then the next challenge is about data model. So basically the data sits in a database, and that database follows certain structure with like certain column names, so table names, column names, data types, as you may expect. So this is like a relational database, and we in fact convert data, the clinical records, into this like data model that we call a MOP data model. So the thing is that the data model as is in the hospital is not made, is not like designed around a research question. So I'm going to give you like just an example, a concrete example of why this can be difficult. So imagine blood pressure, just two numbers, systolic, systolic, and what you can imagine, I think, or what you imagining is just a patient sitting down on a chair, having this measurement maybe on the left arm, but also it could be in the right arm. The patient might be standing. The patient might be lying down on a bed. Also, if a patient is just like an outpatient, comes for a visit, they might have multiple records in a single visit. You don't know which one is like the main one. Or if a patient is an inpatient, it might be have like an invasive measurement. So be like an ICU, and you have multiple records again, but maybe like multiple records every second. And so then when a researcher comes to us and say, oh, I want all patients' blood pressure measurements, they're not, what we need, in fact, to figure out is like, what is the context of that question? Do they want the blood pressure for all patients? Like it's really like a task of like maybe pulling this data from different sources, different forms, and making sense of like this inconsistent records. The next challenge that I'm going to talk about, which is part of a data model, is what we call the standardized vocabularies. So we've got standardized like NHS standard codes for some things like procedures and medications, but we also got international vocabularies. You may not have heard of them. So it's called like ASLMAT or DM+D, RxNorm. And in theory, they are supposed to make everything consistent and interoperable. But in fact, some clinical terms don't have standard codes associated to it. And even when hospitals, not necessarily, they use like the same vocabularies. And also they might use like custom lists and older versions of the vocabularies. But what I want to say is that I don't want like to just like say bad news. I don't think these challenges should, you know, push us back. And in fact, technology is starting to catch up. We have richer data. And recently, in fact, this week, we received news that we have a digital histopathology in UCLH, for example. Imaging and genomics is also like, everything's improving. And on the top of that, the infrastructure is maturing. So I mentioned the TREs. So we have having access to cloud tools, and everything's becoming available now. And I think the direction of travel is very clear. But technology alone doesn't really stays like could have like all this infrastructure, but it's still like it's not enough. And a huge part of the solution is really work closely with the people that drive the research. And a lot depends on us, or like the data engineers that work with them, to really understand what are the questions they want. Like we need to talk to them very like all the time, receive feedback. Like we need to tell them which data in fact are we can deliver, we cannot deliver, given like negotiate the scope. So given a time constraint, say we can deliver this in 3 weeks. And so that like can make the research feasible. Yeah, basically like discuss priorities, risks, make them aware of that. Sometimes they have no clue. And then I think the last one is collaboration. And even though I'm part of like a small team, and at the beginning, I felt isolated sometimes because we work in different projects and with different requirements. But there was always some overlap in what we're doing. We do use the same framework to standardize the clinical records into the MOP data model. But it still like felt we're sort of like little islands. And I do work with like brilliant colleagues, and have one in particular, ND, and he created like an R package to translate this MOP concepts into their corresponding MOP names, so that it's really, really useful, not just for us that are coding and preparing these data extracts, but also for the researchers, because they don't really understand the codes, they're just numbers. And even though he developed that package, there's no space for him, like just to say, hey, I'm developing this. And he just like had this a great idea. He didn't have the opportunity to just like, hey, I'm doing this. So one of the most effective things that I did was to create like a learning sessions. It's just a recurring meeting where each of us could just maybe present something new we're doing, or ask a question that we just like have the community and everyone in our still like little team, but it really strengthened like everyone's work, and everyone really enjoys the sessions. So where does this leave us? So the challenges that I mentioned are real, and maybe you have like similar challenges as well in your fields and your domains. And for us, it feels sometimes like every trust and every institution are trying to do like the same ends work. Everyone is trying to do like sort of like similar problems. They're also trying to standardize the data, maybe like in different ways. And I think like RSC is like a very good space, especially like to create like this community, and you can ask people, and I think there's a great space to allow collaboration. And my call to you here is that like sometimes we cannot share our code or share our data, but we can share our stories and our experiences. And my call to you is to, like, if you go back, still feel isolated in like your department, just like create a space where you can talk about maybe a new art package, maybe like some questions you have, and you try to, create a collaboration. I think that's how collaboration really begins. Thank you.
Yeah, I will sort of go through from the top. Let me see. So we have NHS staff, like academics, are underpaid and overworked. How do we persuade frontline staff that it is worth investing their time right now to improve how data is collected and recorded for the benefit of researchers?
So what I've learned is that nurses, for example, really, they do like the clinical records, like it's really precise. But I'm not, I think it's maybe I'm not the right person to really like answer this question, but what I'm thinking of is always like what I try to do if you see like some records that are not as we expected. It's just like try to go back to the source and try to figure out how to improve it. But we're not up to like, how can we improve like their pay in order to like make sure, I think it's the opposite. I think we need to make them aware how the data is, or change it, maybe the data model that you're working with, so that we can in fact represent what we want. Yeah, I think I'm gonna live with it.
I definitely agree with your first point. If you want to know what's going on, ask the nurses.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that was a wonderful talk, but I think we shall move on. There are plenty more questions. This is Anna, so if anyone would like to catch you in the breaks and ask questions, I'm sure you are open to that. So if
Oh, sorry.
The second speaker is coming from a slightly different perspective. This is Piper Fowler-Wright, who is a research software engineer at the Rosalind Franklin Institute in Oxford. Strong interest in open source software and computing, but today he's actually going to talk to us about transferable skills, which I think has a strong cycling theme. I know there are at least a few people here who are keen cyclists, so hopefully this will be of great interest to some of you specifically. So I will hand over to Piper.
Brilliant. Thank you, and thank you, Anna, for the interesting talk. I'd like to start mine with a few questions, if I could ask people in the room to raise their hands. So how many of you here today have a background in computer science? Okay, that's a very healthy number. Okay, how about how many people were academic researchers before becoming software engineers? Okay, so there's definitely a lot of overlap as well there. What about how many of you did something that's completely different previously? Okay, so it's actually a lot of splits. That's great. So the point is there are many different pathways into research software engineering. There is no one particular background or expertise we all have. And similarly, there's no one set of skills a research software engineer has or needs, but a multitude of skills that transfer between different roles. And today I want to convince you that these transferable skills not only make us versatile, they're what enable us to deliver cross-domain research excellence. So having established that we've all come from different places, I want to tell you a bit about my own pathway, which I might describe as a long-distance approach to research software engineering. I want to tell you a story of a cycling trip I did from Edinburgh up in Scotland, on the top left there, and to Munich in Germany, in the bottom right. So I was a PhD student at the University of St. Andrews a few years ago, and together with my supervisor, we'd been invited to a physics conference called Molecular Paratonics. My supervisor was set to take the train to the conference, and I had a wild idea. I proposed that if I was able to keep my costs under those of his travel and accommodation, I would be able to take the time off work and make the trip by bike. He agreed, and so the plan was set. My supervisor on the Eurostar and me on my bike in the sunshine. Of course, the reality of cycling in the UK was the same bike, but it was raining. As for the trains, well, we all know what the standard of Network Rail is, and it turns out the German service isn't much better. So I set out in early September 2022, and on my way down for England, I met friends and family, and I think I even managed to attend a wedding in Wolverhampton. This is me at the Port of Dover, about to take the ferry across, and here's one day later in Belgium, which is really just the same person plus waffles. So I continued on and eventually reached the conference hotel about a week and a half later, where I enjoyed the complimentary buffet and spent the week at the conference resting before getting back on my bike to make the return journey. Now, where I'm going with this is actually a conversation I had with my friend afterwards. He told me, Piper, you should put that on your CV. Really, I said? Yes, it shows a high level of planning, resource management, and initiative. And that is when I realized that relevant experience can come from very unexpected places. So before I make the case for the value of transferable skills, I want them to make the case against specialization. So those of you from the computing world will be familiar with the Unix philosophy of do one thing and do it really well. This has proven a very effective paradigm for producing robust, efficient software. However, it turns out to be good for computers, but not for humans. Humans are naturally jacks of many trades who excel at handling multiple tasks, often simultaneously, and being able to make connections between them. I would then argue further that many traditional careers encourage specialization, not least because it suits the employer to have a highly specialized workforce that perhaps doesn't have the flexibility to find work elsewhere. Research software engineers, of course, on the other hand, there are roles that are completely opposite, with often a large number and often changeable skills from system administration to software engineering, and of course, realizing domain science in between. I think this variety is something to be celebrated, and we should be proud to be jacks of many trades. So, what kind of benefits can training transferable skills bring? Well, the first set is associated with the obvious ones, the skills learned or the outcome. You are able to handle a wider range of tasks as a result. This conveys versatility to your team, such that together you will be better positioned to meet a wider range of possibilities of research needs at your institution. Transferable skills often support a multiplier effect, such that you can build on or pair with skills of your colleagues. The other type of benefit associated with training transferable skills is actually in the process of training. So I'm sure many of you in the audience, wiser than me, will be aware that it's often the ability to learn rather than knowledge learned that is the most important thing. It makes an individual more adaptable, and for sure, being able to deal with uncertainty is an important part of being a good research software engineer. Finally, having transferable skills allows you to apply techniques from one domain into projects in another area. That is, it encourages cross-domain thinking, or perhaps even cross-continental travel. So here's a framework I put together for developing or training transferable skills as individuals and teams, which you can view as developing human research infrastructure. I've given this the acronym of EER for the key points of exploration, exchange, and reflection. So the first part is to identify gaps in your current skill set. To fill these, take a hands-on approach. Look not through a tutorial or a textbook, but find applications that will force you to learn the new skills. While doing so, it is important to give yourself more time, because while learning a new skill, tasks will often take you longer and require more troubleshooting than if you just stuck to your old routine methods. The next part is all about communication. So my role in distribution software engineering was in part inspired by workshops I taught through for the carpentries while I was a student at University of St Andrews. Beyond teaching and collaboration, communication also involves engaging with diverse mentors and networks, such as here at the University of Warwick today. For another example, the conference I cycled to in Germany was actually the first time I met my later postdoc supervisor from UC San Diego in California. So a key outcome of this stage is the creation of future opportunities. Finally, reflection allows you to make connections between learned skills, identify transferable elements, and will also help reveal remaining skill gaps so you can continue this cycle of learning. I should mention that those of you who are interested in training for RSEs may want to attend the DRTP session this afternoon, I think at 3:30. So allow me to finish with just a few words for other early career researchers or software engineers who may be in a similar position to me. First, I would say ask questions, both of yourself and for advice from seniors. Second, challenge yourself, both to take on responsibility and to learn new skills. Third, above all, don't be afraid to be a bit adventurous. I hope, if anything, this talk might inspire you to do something just a little bit extraordinary. At the very worst, it will make you a more interesting person to talk to at parties. Thank you for listening.
So we do have a question.
Yep.
Did you cycle here?
That's a very good question. So, no, I took the train to Coventry and I just cycled a few kilometers across town. However, I have a good excuse. I was in Switzerland all last week cycling, and I'm absolutely shattered. So, if you want to hear more about that, please just come and talk to me in the break. I'll tell you all about it.
Okay, and shall yeah, we definitely have time for another. Yep. I'm going to go for. Let me see. I'm just reading these. Sorry. I actually think I would like to know the answer to the second one. How should RSEs make the case to the superiors to be, at various levels, to be allocated enough time for the kind of self-development that you're describing here? Which is a $1 million question right now.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. So, yeah, maybe it helps if you can. If you find a way to, with your current projects, to have a record or some history of what skills you have used at previous things, because it won't necessarily be the things that were initially on the proposal or the grant or you know, the job application. And I think it's very helpful if you can yes, just enumerate or have evidence for skills you've used in the past and explain, you know, even if we can't see immediately where the skill is going to take me, it's bound to be useful and it's bound to increase the versatility and breadth of skills my team has.
That is a $1 million question, because I'm sure your superiors were absolutely happy to have you do all kinds of things, because they're all lovely people. Some of them.
Yes, very lucky. Yeah.
So yeah, so we have time for another. So how do you reconcile the transferable skills, this, with specialization bringing efficiency? So specialist tasks can be completed by those with relevant experience. We are quite specialized, and you're sort of advocating for instead.
Yeah, so I think we definitely do still need specialization. Clearly we need people who are experts at things, but I think you know, you don't want to get, especially early on in your career, you don't want to get trapped in specializing too soon, because it's always easier to build an experience and go down a set path. But I think there is a lot of value. You can do a lot with in a lot of areas by learning very little and just having a basic understanding. And then yes, maybe when there is a strong need to do more specialization, then you can go with that.
Okay, so I think the session here is over. I know Roman has a few remarks, but let's thank all three of our morning speakers again.